Yeah, hello everyone, and welcome to the latest BCIS construction webinar. So looking today at the crucial role that benchmarking plays in cost estimating. So I'm Richard McLean. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer here at BCIS. Just a bit of the usual housekeeping before we start. So apologies if you're attending these regularly. It can be a little bit repetitive, but so as usual, the webinar is being recorded and will be shared with everyone who's registered. It will also be accessible on our website. If you want to stay up to date with the latest news and insights from BCIS, please do follow our company LinkedIn page. So we've had some questions submitted prior to the webinar. So we'll tackle those during the session. But of course, we always welcome questions from attendees as we go along too. So this can be accessible by the little question mark symbol that you can see on the taskbar. And that if we don't get time, hopefully we will. But if we don't get time, we will cover these in the Q&A documents that we send out to attendees afterwards. So the purpose of these questions is for us. So next we're going to be covering the polls. And just to explain a quick purpose for this, this is just to help us understand what you are seeing in your own role. These can help us to think about future content that might be useful. To allow the questions to be answered right up to the end of the session, we won't publish the answers during the webinar, but we will share the full results with the recording when we send that out. If any question isn't relevant to you, please feel free just to ignore it and click away or select that it's not relevant to you. So following the webinar, you'll also receive a short survey asking you for some feedback on the webinar. Please take the time to complete it if you can. It genuinely really does help us plan future sessions and the content that we send out as well. It also helps us understand how we kind of move forward. So there's also the options to ask any questions that you didn't have the chance during the session, or if you just think of them later. Okay, so just to introduce the panel today, so joining me live on the session, we have James Fisk and Carl Horton. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
We're also got Harry, who's not with us today. He's actually on holiday, so lucky him. But we kindly, he's recorded a session for us. So there's going to be a little bit of a video in the session. Hopefully technology supports us the way that we intend. We'll see how that one goes. If it doesn't, we'll swiftly move on. But yeah, so Harry really has done a great little session. It's only about kind of 9 minutes of the session, but we'll see where we get on for. Okay, lovely. So the agenda we're going to be covering today. So first of all is what is benchmarking and why should we do it? Common challenges, the key steps and principles, what BCIS is doing to try to help. Then we're going to do a summary and then a QA. And so without further ado, I believe I'm going to hand over to Mr. Fisk.
Thank you, Richard. Good housekeeping as always. Welcome everybody. Delighted to be here with you today, talking about it's an old term and quite frequently used in the construction industry. This thing called benchmarking, but over the many years that I've been in the industry, we've seen some good examples and some bad examples of that, and I'm sure some of those stories will come out between Carl and I later on as part of the questions. But delighted to be here. I'm just going to set the scene initially with just a few brief slides, and then we'll move on to Harry's recording before we sort of drop into the other parts of the agenda. So we're here today to talk about benchmarking. Benchmarking, it's not a new concept. It's come from other industries in the 60s, and really I think the first recollection I have of benchmarking really in the construction industry was around the late 90s with the Latham and Egan reports that you can see on screen there on the left. Constructing the team and rethinking construction. That was the first time that certainly I was aware of the concept of benchmarking being used in the industry. And as a very, very junior QS, because obviously I'm not that old, Rich, regardless of what you may think, as a very, very junior QS, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
You can cover optimism by later, James.
Yeah. Okay, it's going to be a bit like that today, is it? Okay, thank you. Yeah, as a junior QS at that stage. It was around the late 90s when we started, but I personally was getting involved in more requests for benchmarking studies. And at that time, we were kind of finding our way with what benchmarking actually was. We're now in a very different place, and you can see over on the right-hand side that there's a huge amounts of guidance that's now available. Those of you that get involved in this will obviously recognise some of these titles, but the standard form of cost analysis is the thing that BCIS produces, which is a way of analysing data into a common structure, which is very, very important when it comes down to benchmarking, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later on. But the one on the left is the latest RSES guidance, which is cost analysis and benchmarking. I believe it's the 2nd edition. I think it came out last year. If memory serves me, it's a fantastic document. It really is a very, very good document. And Sarah Davidson from Gleeds, who was the lead author, done a fantastic job of pulling together what is very simple and easy to follow. That's available on the RSES website, and I do recommend, if you haven't, do read it. It is one of those pieces of guidance which is incredibly easy to read and follow, unlike some of the other guidance that perhaps I've been a bit more vocal about in the industry over recent months. But we'll move swiftly on. Carl, you may have been involved in the best practice in benchmarking. Is that the IPA one?
It is, yeah. So that came about probably about 4 or 5 years ago now. So I think that the one on screen is the 2nd edition as well. So there was further iterations to it, but that was a combination of people from industry coming together, working with the IPA to set about trying to get some principles in place, which is again good study, good case studies in there as well. So there's plenty of reference material out there now.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, so lots of good stuff, a lot more guidance, a lot more ways that can teach us how to analyze data, structure data, do benchmarking, and basically evolve and fine tune and focus and improve. And that's really what benchmarking is about. Rich, so if you can click the button for me if you're driving the slides, thank you. This is quite. It looks a busy chart. It had very flash animation on it, but Richard was so concerned that Hollywood would be calling me afterwards with my animation skills that he's put that as a flat image for us now. But right in the middle of
budget.
Absolutely. So benchmarking, as it really is defined in the middle of that sort of circle, is the process of comparing your project against others. And that can be done for a number of different reasons. That might be to identify areas to improve. That could be to show stakeholders that they're getting value for money. There can be all sorts of different reasons why you may want to do benchmarking. And benchmarking, even though we're talking about construction cost benchmarking today, benchmarking can be applied for all different forms of data. I've seen examples of benchmarking operational costs, IT costs for businesses, health and safety stats. Obviously, we're quite heavily involved in carbon with the built environment carbon database. So there's plenty of benchmarking going on in the carbon kind of area as well at the moment. And benchmarking is very, very easy in terms of its steps. And Harry is going to be going through this in his video a little bit later. But in the main, very high level, you define what you want to benchmark, what you want to identify and sort of compare. You then collect a load of data on your project. You then collect a load of data on other similar projects. You then analyze that. You identify what actions you want to make at the end of it, and then you carry on. So the concept of benchmarking shouldn't be one where you do it once and step away and pat yourselves on the back. it should be a constant circular thing where you're making changes and then you're benchmarking again and then you're making more changes. So the concept of benchmarking is I think better drawn as a sort of a circular process as we see here. But Harry's going to be going through this in some detail with the slides that he's producing. You can click the button for me, Rich, please. This slide again had some really flashy animation, but it's a diagram that I've talked through a number of times but before, and it's one that we use when we explain what BCIS and some of the data that we produce at BCIS is all about. This is really here to remind us that benchmarking can be done at any stage of the life of a project. So right at the very early stage when you're producing your feasibility studies and using sort of cost per meter squared data, you may want to be obviously referencing a lot of historical data to be able to do that. And all the way through as we get into more details, elements and systems costs, activity costs, even down to materials and labor and things like productivity. Any stage of the construction process, you can obviously do benchmarking, and the chances are that you're going to probably do that in more and more detail as more and more information is available during that evolution of the design process. But that benchmarking shouldn't stop at construction. It should obviously continue into when you're maintaining and using the building. But for the purpose of today, we're here to really talk about the construction phases. Hit the button for me, Rich, please.
Sorry, I did press it. It's just taking a second. There we are.
No problems. So when you've gone through the process of comparing your project, here's some examples of some of the benchmarking styles of charts that certainly I've seen. We will be talking about the BCIS benchmark report a little bit later on, which is the report that we produce after we've taken data from an organization and analyzed into a consistent format to put onto BCIS. But these are sort of three examples, you know, sort of the target diagram, the bar chart with the benchmarks all the way through to the normal distribution curve. Very common sort of charts that are ideally designed for somebody, no matter where they are in an organization, they can look at that and they can quite quickly identify whether they're in a good, bad, or an indifferent place with their project. So just three examples there, just to try and show you what some of the output charts may look like from a benchmarking perspective. But there's plenty of examples of these available, including that BCIS benchmark report. Thanks, Rich. So why should we do it? Well, there'll be a number of different reasons why we should do benchmarking, and it does depend on who you are and where you are in the supply chain. Some of the common ones that obviously we're familiar with is the stakeholder benchmark report, which is really designed to sort of show that a client funder is getting value for money, how their project at the moment is comparing against others. We obviously like to see project teams using benchmarking as a way of sort of identifying areas to improve, sort of, you know, to support value engineering activities and other things. Benchmarking, if you do it right, is also a good predictor of future project costs. And by that, I mean, as you're looking at other comparable projects, you can see things that happen in those other projects that are likely to also happen with yours. So it's a great way of sort of informing, you know, risks and other things that I'm sure we'll talk about in the conversation later on. Now, when we talk about benchmarking, there are different terms thrown around with benchmarking. There's internal benchmarking, which is comparing your project against others within your organization or your portfolio. External benchmarking, which is the next bullet point, is about comparing your project against others outside of your portfolio, sometimes even outside of your sector. Generally, we tend to work with organizations who are trying to do the first part, the internal benchmarking first, and then move on to once they've got their own house in order, if you like, to then move over to comparing against other organizations. But ultimately, benchmarking is all about sort of driving better better project outcomes. There's a little quote, and there's loads of much better quotes than I'm sure the one that we've selected here, but it's all about understanding what we've done in the past so that we can avoid making the same mistakes in the future. So that is not just a benchmarking statement. That is a reason why people should be capturing and analyzing and keeping their own data, because if we don't have that historical record, we have no chance of, chances are we're just going to make the same mistakes and we're not going to improve. So that's sort of our statement here on why we should do benchmarking. Next slide, Rich. I'm almost there, sorry.
Great. James, I'm just going to quickly interrupt for a moment. We've just had quite a few people saying they can't see the slides. So a lot have left and joined again. But if you can't see the slides, folks, just leave the webinar and rejoin. And 99% of the time it works. But just to remind, we will be sending all of this out. You will get the recording and the slides. So you won't miss out, I promise. So back to the studio.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So common challenges. So unsurprisingly, for those that have joined a BCIS webinar, we'll be talking a lot about data challenges. So access to data, and Carl and I, I'm sure, will be talking about this in sort of the Q&A sort of discussion later on, some examples of these things, but the most common challenge really is around data. So accessing data, willingness to share, to be able to access that data has been a big problem in a number of benchmarking sort of schemes and projects that I've witnessed or been part of. Sometimes there's an inability to share that through contractual reasons and all sorts of other things, and perhaps we'll talk about this a little bit later on. But there's a challenge around accessing data very all, and if you are lucky enough to get the data, you often find that it's in very different formats, very different scopes. So some bits of data will include things that other projects' bits of data don't include, for example. So there's an inequality and inconsistency. Yeah, the formats of data within the industry, we're fantastic at calling the same thing multiple different names, of course. So there's always a lack of consistency in terms of that. And the last bullet point on the top right is about the context of data. So when you're benchmarking, it's obviously really important to understand the context. You just don't want to compare one number for one project against another number for another project. You need to understand the context of those projects, you know, the attributes, the conditions, the cost drivers, and all of the other bits that we'll come on to a little bit later on. So there's some real challenges there in terms of, you know, not being able to access the data, and if you are able to access it, sometimes quality and consistency issues. All of those things often result in a real risk that you can't compare like for like. So the apples with oranges, beautiful picture that we've put up there. That's a real risk, and probably the biggest challenge in benchmarking. We've also made a note here at the bottom, which is a bit of a warning sign. I've certainly, and I'm sure you have, Carl, been involved in a number of projects where they're trying to use the outputs of the benchmark report for a certain reason, and that often puts the people who are doing the benchmark report under a bit of pressure to make sure that it's giving the right answers. So we've got a little image of the individual, you know, artificially lifting up the bar there on the bottom left. Unfortunately, that is a very common common thing from my experience in this area. And perhaps we'll chat around that in the Q&A later. So that sort of, yeah, is hopefully setting the scene in terms of benchmarking, a bit of the history and some of the challenges and bits that I'm sure we'll be talking about in a bit more detail. I think we're now going to come on to Harry's video. So this is where we are all praying that the technology works. So Harry's going to talk us through the key steps and principles in a bit of detail over the next few minutes. We hope.
It's all coming through. Yeah, for those of you who joined late, we pre-warned. This is the first time we've tried this, so fingers crossed it works wonderfully.
That's absolutely fundamental, and all quantity surveyors should keep it in mind whenever they're tackling a benchmarking process, and no matter what stage of the process that they're in. Benchmarking is not about trying to collect and analyze every single piece of project information right from the beginning. The best examples of benchmarking start off measuring only a few key metrics that are really important for making decisions and getting them really dialed in. You can always add complexities later once you start to understand the variables better. Now, let's dive into the 6 key steps. First step to any benchmarking project is to define the process. All good benchmarking projects start off with a clear plan. That's easily understood. The entire team is up to speed. Roles and responsibilities are clearly defined, and everyone understands why we're collecting the data and ultimately what it's going to be used for. Now, there are many different ways of planning, but to get the ball rolling during this stage, you could ask yourself questions like, what specific information will be useful for the purpose? And when it comes to making sure that we're analyzing projects consistently, what data structure is going to be used? Is that the standard form of cost analysis? Particularly useful if you're comparing to the BCIS database. How much time and resources are going to be available for this task? And are there any confidentiality requirements for the data sources that we really need to consider? The second stage of a benchmarking project is data collection. And what we really want to see here is a database that's growing. We want to see details coming in about the project that's currently in focus, as well as details about lots and lots of other projects that we can compare against. Now, time and resources are going to be a barrier here, so consistency is key to unlocking the power of scalability and teamwork. We want to see different people picking up where others left off, and we don't want to see unique and complicated processes that are controlled by a single person who will bottleneck and slow everyone else down. So find a consistent way of collecting and storing details. You might find out that during this stage, you don't currently have enough data in-house to be able to analyze the performance. And that's fine. You might just need a little bit of help gathering that. And in this case, it's worth checking out the cost analysis section of your BCI subscription. There's over 21,000 projects on there, all vetted and analysed using the standard form of cost analysis by our team, and it's more than likely that you'll find something there worth comparing against. Data comparison, that's the third stage of a benchmarking project. And in a nutshell, this is where you take the collected data, line the projects up side by side, and by doing that, we can start to identify the best examples, the averages, and the range of outcomes. A fundamental rule here is that comparisons are carried out on a like-for-like basis. They need to be adjusted and normalized for external influences on the costs that aren't directly related to the project's design or the building function. The 2 key factors for normalization and should be used on all benchmarking projects are location and time. Location, because building the same project in central London versus Sheffield is going to have different costs. So adjusting for geographical or site-specific differences using location factors should be done. And when it comes to time and pricing conditions, prices change over time. So adjust costs for inflation and the state of the construction economy using tender price indices or other relevant indices. Step 4 is data analysis, and the overview of this step is we're providing context to the raw facts and figures that exist in the database so far. The raw numbers by themselves are little value without explaining the reasoning behind them. So think about this. If the goal is to be able to explain to a stakeholder why project A costs less or more than project B, you need to be thinking beyond just figures. If project A is cheaper, be specific about whether it was due to design efficiencies, economies of scale, or or maybe it was just unforeseen costs in project B. Be specific, but also understand that they may not have the same familiarity and background information as you, the cost expert. Help them get a grasp of what it is that you're actually saying by producing your reports with the reader's viewpoint in mind. Bring them on a journey, explain your methodology, assumptions, exclusions, and how the abnormals were dealt with, but don't use too much technical quantity surveying terminology. And finally, remember confidentiality. When presenting the results, be careful not to let confidential details slip. Compare the numbers, but maybe use reference numbers instead of project names to keep things confidential. Step 5 is all about taking action, and it's the most important step, because if we never took action based on the insights that we've produced so far, all the effort has been wasted. All we'd have done is identify changes that could have been done but never actually improved the project. So now it's time to connect benchmarking with value engineering discussions and bring the learning from the analysis and influence changes backed up by data rather than just relying on gut instincts. The timing of this is crucial. We need to act on the recommendations fast. Technically, we can make changes at any stage of a project, but from a cost and carbon point of view, the earlier the better. Later on, changes can lead to rework and delays and will no longer be beneficial. And finally, benchmarking is an ongoing process that should be repeated. For live projects, repeating the benchmarking process after a change has been implemented or the design is developed means that there are snapshots that we can measure to see what the impact of those changes are and make sure that continuous improvement is taking place. From an accuracy point of view, the accuracy of our advice that we're giving clients, the effectiveness of our benchmarking improves when the data library is growing. Repeating the process, adding more projects as they become available, provides more data points and solidifies averages and trends. The same thing goes for indices that we use for normalization. Keep the top of things and improve the accuracy of your results by always using the latest indices. To summarize with a quick recap, there are 6 stages to a benchmarking process. It starts with a clear plan, easily understood by all team members. Within stage 2, we go into data collection, which is where we gather only the important data, a small amount of important data, but from lots of projects that we can compare against. Step 3 is the comparison stage, where we line all the projects up side by side, understanding which is the best example, what are the averages, and what the range of outcomes are. Data analysis is where we add context to the raw facts and figures and clearly communicate the insights to stakeholders. The action step is implementing changes to a project and making improvements based on the insights. And the final stage, 6, which is repeat, and we repeat the benchmarking frequently throughout the project lifecycle.
Excellent. Hopefully that worked for everyone well. Let me just share the rest of the deck. Lovely. Can everyone see that okay?
It's working for me, Rich. Yeah.
Working for me.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, brilliant. So now I'm going to hand over to Carl, and Carl's going to have a look at what BCIS is trying to do to help in this area. Carl.
Yeah. Thanks, Rich, and well done, Harry. You're probably sat on a beach in Italy somewhere drinking a beer, so well done for that recording.
Shame he's missing out.
It's staging for the BCIS webinar, so I think you've done a good job. So yeah, just a little bit about what we're trying to do to help in this space. So James has done a great job of covering off the sort of the common challenges and what we see with benchmarking. So the classic case of data not being held centrally, or if it's being held, it lacks consistency. And obviously, as we've all said, with no data, how can you improve? So alongside providing data, which is one the sort of the holy grail of what we do at the BCIS, we also produce the standard form of cost analysis. So we've given data, we're given a way of structuring that data, but we've also been working on something called BCIS form. So as a little bit of a teaser, BCIS form will allow subscribers to capture their own data, manage their own data, and benchmark their own data in a secure, dedicated area within BCIS. So they'll be able to log in, start to put their information in, and start to really do some magical stuff with their data, their own data, in a secure environment. It will be data that's not just at estimate stage. It will be able to track those projects through tender stage, through in construction, and through to completion. So you'll be able to track how project costs are moving. You'll be able to understand why they're moving, how scope is impacting on those costs, and you'll really start to build your own analytics to it. But then you get to bring in the beauty of things like the BCIS indices that allows you to normalize that data for time and location. So you'll be able to create your own internal benchmarks. And also then you get to bring in the BCIS data to like that external comparison as well. So it's a watch this space. It's coming to a device near you very, very soon. And well, hopefully by the end of this year. But yeah, we're really excited by it. We are interested in speaking to customers who may be interested in doing this sort of data capture journey with us. So feel free to reach out to us and drop us a line.
Lovely. Thank you, Carl. And I think, James, you're going to cover the summary for us.
Am I? Okay, good.
That's what the slide says.
That's excellent. Well, to summarize the intro sort of part of this, obviously the main part will be the discussions and the questions. By the way, Rich, there's some really challenging, good questions coming in, which is fantastic to see. Usual process, tricky ones to Carl, easy ones to me. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Thank you.
Payment was received.
Well done, superb. So to summarize, yeah, benchmarking isn't new. It's been around for a while, and it can offer huge benefits when it's done correctly and for the right reasons. As we've seen from Harry's video, the principles are simple, and you'll see this in the guidance that we pointed to at the beginning of the session. But it does come with challenges, specifically around data and managing expectations and some of the other bits that's come out of today or already. We're obviously reminding people that normalization is one of the areas, when you're rebasing your data to make sure you are comparing like for like. There are unfortunately many examples I've seen in my years where that rebasing is either not done or not done correctly. So you're not quite pulling those projects on a comparable basis. So today was also a subtle reminder that those rebasing metrics, along with quite a bit of historical data, is available within BCIS. And the last thing that we kind of wanted to get over is that we have seen many different systems being created and calculated, all working in slightly different ways, doing things in some cases not great ways. So we're aware of this as an industry challenge. So BCIS form, as Carl just sort of gave a little teaser to, is hopefully something that can make a real difference and help a number of people on the call and in the wider industry. So that's yeah, kind of the summary of this part of the webinar. Rich, are you going to throw some challenging questions at us?
We'll start gently, and we'll see how we go from there. So grab a glass of water, gents. Brilliant. Yes. So yeah, we're going to move on to the questions which have been pre-submitted first of all. So one to kick things off for me. So this actually is reflected in some of the questions we've had in here today. But we often hear about things like optimism bias, strategic misinterpretation, influencing the delivery and budgeting of major infrastructure or construction projects in the UK. So could you talk us through why this might be, and how could we be better at identifying and managing it?
And that's starting off lightly.
This is the easy one. Yep.
Okay, excellent. I've just realised I've got an appointment. Carl, that's a tricky one. Do you want to take the lead on that?
Yeah. Well, we mentioned optimism bias earlier when you were talking about your age. So the the human nature, I guess, optimism bias. So what is it? It's all about basically being optimistic about where the costs are going to land on a project. And ultimately, what we're saying is that the cost the people who are using optimism bias feel that the cost is going to fall somewhere probably below the average cost. And what that does is probably underestimate the cost of a project. It probably underestimates the risks of a project, but it probably overstates the benefits of a project. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to convince perhaps a funder or an investor that this is the project to go with, and it's all going to go really well, and that's why we've got this optimism bias in there. What it sets out is a dangerous precedent that more likely the number that's been touted at the start is unlikely to be hit, and what you then see is, particularly if it's a public funded document, that people will see that number, they'll remember that number, and that number will be the number they get hit with every time because it's been an unrealistic starting point for the project to go with. So it happens a lot, and it continues to happen. But what we obviously are encouraging, that the whole basis of this webinar is about benchmarking. So benchmarking is there as a tool to try and make sure we can challenge those numbers and actually have an evidence-based number and an outcome which is realistically something that should be used to put forward. So does that kind of help?
With just adding to that, you should probably reinforce at this point that these are our views, not those necessarily of BCIS, by the way, Rich, because
I think we might run these across all of the slides from going forwards.
That would be great. I mean, optimism bias, I've heard it referred to, Carl, in the industry, as I'm sure you have, as just a way of, well, we're rubbish at estimating. How do we get more contingency into our estimate so it's less embarrassing when it's wrong? And I whether I support that or not, I'll keep aside. There, from my perspective, this is probably, well, it's connected to benchmarking. Is the more data that you capture on projects, and as you were talking about with BCIS form earlier, that if you're capturing data at various stages of the life of that project, and you hopefully understand and plot and capture the reasons for the change between those stages, because inevitably there will be. Clients will change their mind, there'll be scope creep, there'll be things that we didn't understand, ground conditions, all that happens, that's life. But as long as we capture and understand the reasons for those changes during the life, then if we're getting better at capturing that data, then that would hopefully start to feed into better risk analysis, better use of contingencies, and perhaps less strong need for optimism bias. Would that be a fair thing to say, Carl?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. And there are things out there, reference class forecasting is a good way, another good thing to use, where you're not just looking at your internal data, which we've talked about before, building that internal picture. But that's when you're bringing in external data to compare as well. It's always good to have as much information as possible to set that number, because that number, as I said, is the one that people inevitably remember, and particularly on high profile projects, they're the ones that if it gets out and it sets off on the wrong foot, it's very difficult to recover. And then all that happens is projects get de-scoped, benefits aren't realized in the same way that they were intended to, and it all ends up in a bit of a mess.
Yeah, so I think our advice is, capture more data, more context of that data. That will help benchmarking. That will also help over time the accuracy of the estimates and the benchmarking against those estimates, of course. So yeah, capturing data in a consistent way that's auditable with the context is critical, and being able to share that data. It's all well and good having your own pool of data, but you do need to compare against other organizations that may be doing things in a slightly different way. So as an industry, we do need to get better at sharing that data in a way that we don't feel threatened by it, Richard, I think.
Lovely. Okay, thank you, gents. So we've got a few questions to go through. We've had an awful lot of questions on here, so thank you all so far. What we're going to do is we'll go through the questions that were submitted prior to the session. We might need to keep these fairly quick fire, gents, if we try and get through these. So we will cover as many as we can. So just a bit of housekeeping, polite reminder. If you've got a question, please pop it into the question box. We'll either try and get it done by 12. If not, we will answer it and circulate if we can. And also just a gentle reminder of the polls. If you could just spare a minute or two completing those, it really does help us. So without further ado, question number 1. So what are some of the better examples of benchmarking you've seen? And I'll say slightly in brackets and worse.
Can I go for the better one?
I was going to say I've got a few examples of the worst ones, and one of them, embarrassingly, is a project I was involved with. So
Can I take the good one then?
Should we go good first? Go on then, Carl.
Yeah. So I've been fortunate enough to be involved in some good ones across different sectors of industry. One I can think of that springs to mind is actually started off on not a good foot, in the sense of a client had a real ambition to create reference material that they could use for benchmarking that could inform future estimates. And the classic brief, you go in there and you sit down and you start to talk to people. First of all, they haven't necessarily got a defined structure for capturing data, and the data is spread around everywhere across the whole of their business, sat in different silos, sat on people's desks, sat on people's laptops. It was, you name it, all the sort of things that were going on. So the first thing we had to do was going and actually get a structure, agree a series of workshops, agree a structure. So we've set what we want to capture against these different sort of items that they had. Then we set up the process of actually starting to get the data in. It takes time and investment to do this, and over the course of a few months, we started to build that body of knowledge, where we're getting the project's data coming through, analysing it into this standard form that we'd agreed, and we started to get that internal benchmark information coming through. So it took a bit of time to get that information, but it then started to percolate through and was starting to be used in estimates. But what the reason I want to sort of talk about that one was it didn't just stop there. So that internal benchmarking was set up, and that was a foundation that was being repeated. More and more data, historical data, was coming in. But what we were doing, because we were retrofitting historical data in, we weren't sitting and talking to project engineers who were working. We had to then go and interview them post completion of projects to try and understand what happened with costs. And by doing this, we came up with what we were classifying as a sort of a cost driver crib sheet. So all the sort of things that would appear on a project which would impact on the cost. So that might be the things that could impact on the scope, things that could be aware when they're going out to sites. So what we started to do was collect and analyze what these cost drivers, what impact they had on the number as well. So what this did was allow us to move from what did their projects cost them to understand what it should cost them in the future. So by taking this information around these cost drivers meant that when the estimates were being produced, we could say, actually, you're working in this particular area. You know that from historical data, these things are likely to occur. So you can then start to understand, of those cost drivers, which ones can we influence, which ones can we do something about that. It might be perhaps it's a earlier engagement with a contractor. It might be buying some materials earlier in the process. So all these things started to build into the picture to say, well, we know it costs that, but what we should we be paying for something in the future? And that process was really fundamental in saving multiple £1 million in future sort of contracts, really baked into their estimating process as well. So a really good, I thought, a good example of how to do benchmark and do it well, but start necessarily not from a good place, but the outturn, the end was really good.
I like that, Carl. Excellent.
Yeah.
So my worst example didn't get past your first hurdle, Carl, really. So I will obviously not mention names to save the blushes, but commissioned to do a benchmarking project, arrived to do that exact thing, to find out that there wasn't any data. And after we started to dig in, normally with an organization, even if there is no official central repository and collection process and analysis process, which is all contained, you will often find who I refer to as Bob. Bob sits in an organization with his lever arch file that you know is storing and sort of capturing information, and Bob is often very reluctant to let that information go, by the way. That's one of the other challenges that I'm sure we'll talk about later. So on this particular project, there was nothing. There was a high churn of staff from this particular organization. So there was no corporate memory, there was no memory on those projects whatsoever. A heavy reliance on consultants that again were changing and moving. So it became a real challenge to be able to actually access any information. The only information that was really available was the stuff that was captured from the finance sort of systems. And exactly as we said at the beginning of this session, without the context of the data, you just, you know, you can't really use it. And we couldn't do the benchmarking study, but there were other versions of benchmarking done within that organization that we looked at that again was based on stuff that just wasn't comparing like for like, and therefore was actually incredibly dangerous to be using. So for all of the reasons that we said and those challenges, this particular example, you know, we should have got to the point where benchmarking not possible. Let's set up processes and start to capture data. And the way that you were then talking with your good example, Carl, that's what needed to happen on this particular project. There's been multiple examples of similar things, Richard, that I've unfortunately witnessed. Some very high-profile government-funded projects that involved data sharing and benchmarking. Just didn't happen. There's real concerns within organizations to share data because they're concerned about either contractual reasons or the fact that data might be used against them. It might cause them embarrassment. You know, there's all sorts of reasons why people aren't sharing data. But yeah, that's conscious of time. Sorry.
No, excellent.
You told us to be quick, and we're not.
Well, if this is the quick fire version, I'm glad we're not getting the full one.
The extended edition's coming out later.
Great. Hopefully this one should be pretty straightforward. But what's the minimum data set size needed for a reliable benchmark?
4 million projects.
Perfect. Great.
21,000.
yeah, that's it. As with all things, as long as the quality's there, obviously the more the better. As construction professionals doing benchmarking, sometimes you don't have the luxury of large samples, so you've just got to try and find as many as you possibly can, and try your very best to be able to qualify the quality of those and the context behind it. But it is very, very hard because of those reasons of reluctance sometimes in some sectors to share data. So I don't think there's a number that we can actually say here, Carl, unless you think I'm wrong.
No, I think I'd rather have 5 quality projects to compare against than 25, mediocre ones. So yeah, it's very difficult. And as we've said before, it's all about the reliable bit is the context, making sure you're comparing like for like.
Excellent. Lovely. Thank you, gents. Okay, next question. Any examples or considerations important for international benchmarking?
Yes, yeah, we've done a lot of this. Is a whole webinar in itself.
I'd say gentle reminder on the quick fire round.
So yeah, so for me, you've got issues with currency. You've got issues with very different standards. So yeah, it depends what the purpose of the benchmarking sort of activity is, but often you're not going to build the same thing in another country. There are different, climate conditions. There's different building control and regulations. There's just different styles and other things. Different local materials are available. So yeah, you need to consider all of that. We did, Carl. Perhaps you can talk about the international location factors that we produce to try and facilitate some of this? Might be
good. Yeah. So I echo what you said, James, as well. But yeah, location factors. We've developed location factors that can be applied to a cost at the highest level. So it's been built. Those factors have been built up from first principles. So we've done comparisons of labour, materials, and plant at local level versus the UK. We've looked at productivity. We've looked at import duties. We looked at local taxes, and productivity, etc. That all to try and come up with a flavour for how a cost can differ between one location over another. But used at the very highest level of a cost, just to understand what it may cost to build in one location over another. But again, I echo what James said, that it has to be treated with very much the usual professional judgment. Just to say that you can pick up a cost and move it to another location isn't correct. You can't necessarily. It's a buildability thing. You may not be able to physically construct something that's in one country in another country because of various reasons. So yeah, benchmarking internationally has its own issues around making sure you're following the right standard format of coverage rules, etc. As James said, currency, all those sort of factors come into it.
I think the example where it becomes more useful is probably the larger scale infrastructure type projects, Richard. So the high speed rails or the nuclear or other sorts of areas where it's useful to compare. But the biggest challenge is getting access to the data. There'll be lots of numbers that are reported on projects, but you won't understand the context of it. Is the land purchase cost included in the number that's quoted? All of those sorts of bits that can massively skew the cost of the project could be embedded into those numbers. So as Carl says, proceed with caution on any of that sort of stuff.
Excellent. Okay, lovely. Just before I reveal the next question, this could be a little bit of a grenade. We've had numerous conversations offline on this, gents, but is there a case for using AI to benchmark?
It's the inevitable AI question in every webinar, isn't it? I suppose these days.
Yeah. Can we use AI to generate the answer for us?
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Whether you agree with it or not. AI is a right. Let's go nice. AI is a very powerful tool, but from my perspective at the moment, AI could generate results, present them in a very confident way, but not actually be considering some of the things that we would consider. So I don't think AI is the answer by itself. I think, yes, it can be used as a tool to help and enable benchmarking, but because of those reasons that we said, not understanding the context of the data and the numbers may including land fees and all sorts of other bits. I think it can help, but it's not the answer by itself. I'll keep it nice and sweet.
Excellent. Carl, anything you want to add?
I hate to say, but I agree with James. I think yes, AI has a
very nice.
Yes is the answer to that. I think AI has a place to help with a lot of the legwork, with the processing of information. But absolutely, I agree with the caveat around it needs that wraparound of professional subject matter people who understand the outputs and we're able to challenge the outputs. But it is tread with caution on those ones. But yeah, I believe AI has got a place.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Well done for keeping that punchy there, gents. And then final with the pre-prepared. We have had an almost unprecedented level of questions on here, so we'll try and tackle a few, but we will address everyone that we can. But yeah, final question here is what's the best way to account for scope differences when comparing benchmark data?
It's a fantastic question, this one, and again one that we could spend all day. Was it yours, Richard? Was
No,
it? Oh, no, far too good. There's an element of sometimes with the underlying data you can make account for scope changes. If the data is detailed enough, you may be able to do stuff. There are rebasing, normalization, call it whatever you want, sort of factors for things like multiple stories over single stories, or contractor selection method, and various other things that are available in sort of BCIS that can again address some of those things. But often the truth is that it's going to be up to the professional to make those adjustments. If you got a few projects and one's got piling and the other one hasn't, or whatever it may be, then the professional is either going to have to use the data as is, with the caveat that it's not quite the same, or they will make a professional assessment to try and make them comparable. I think is probably my answer to that.
Great, lovely. Okay. So I'm going to quickly try and grab, might only have time for one or two just before we wrap up. Yeah, I think, here's a good one. So you've highlighted data sharing as a critical challenge. What advice can you give to help unlock this?
Wow. Yeah, so we've written a few pieces around this on data sharing. Ultimately, and there's plenty to read that we've sent out before, so perhaps we can just include a few links on those sort of content pieces that we've produced. But ultimately, data sharing, you've got challenges of behaviors, you've got challenges of contracts, you've got challenges of threat, i.e. the threat that if I share my data, it's going to be used against me in one way, shape or form, by budget cutting or embarrassment or losing my job, because all of those sorts of things they vary organization and project by project. Ultimately, if we want people to share data, it needs to be done in a safe way, where things can be anonymized, and ultimately that people get value back from sharing that data. Lots of people talk about sharing data and unfortunately don't do it. Let's use BCIS as the great example there. So we produce a benchmark report so people share project data with us. We analyze it for them. We then produce a benchmark report as a value add back to them, sort of sharing the data. And we're now at the stage where I'll just go on a slight segue and then come back, but we're now at the stage where we've got more data coming into BCIS than we can analyze. So one of the things that we're going to be doing is going out to the industry and seeing if we can find retired or part-time sort of quantity surveyors, cost consultants. So if anyone is on the call that's in that situation, that we can take them through a training process and quality assurance and all of that type of stuff. But we are certainly at the stage where we've got more data than we're able to analyze. So yeah, we'd be delighted to hear from anyone in the audience that may be able to help us with some of that. Sorry, slight segue, Carl. Don't know if you wanted to add to that or skip over.
No, I was just going to say I'm all for trying to support the industry about how we can share data. I think it's about trying to find the sort of data or the level of data that people are comfortable with sharing. So I think there are facets of data in projects that can be shared in a way which doesn't devalue or doesn't threaten the sensitivity of the overall project. So I think it's like trying to agree when you're in a project environment what that level of data sharing should be. So I think there are the grown-up conversations that can be had to help in that space.
Excellent. Okay, we're bang on for time. So that is pretty much wrapped up. Thank you for everyone who's attending. Just a final plug here. I forgot to mention earlier, we've actually got our next webinar, which is available. So that's our construction outlook with data from our updated 5-year forecast and insight from our expert panels on the ground. With the spending review being delivered by the Chancellor next week, it will no doubt also include some analysis from our Chief Economist, Dr. David Crosswaite, and what that means for construction. That's on the 26th of June, so only 3 weeks away, and we'll include a link with the register when we send out the recording from today. But apart from that, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for all that attended. I hope you found it helpful, and we look forward to seeing you soon.